The battlefield was not filled with bullets and explosions. No, this was a war of politics, words sharper than any blade. Captain Elias Voss stood tall in the grand chamber of the Synax Empire, surrounded by towering alien warriors in golden armor. His Terran uniform felt too thin under their piercing gazes. The air smelled of incense and burning metal, a mixture of royalty and war. The Synax were not just any alien species, they were conquerors, their empire stretching across dozens of star systems. And now, Earth was negotiating peace with them. Elias wasn't a diplomat, but he had been chosen to represent humanity. The reason? His reputation. A soldier, a survivor, and a man who had once outmaneuvered a Synax fleet with a single warship. They respected strength, and Elias had proven he had it. The negotiation had been going smoothly until chaos struck. A sharp whistle cut through the air, a sound that did not belong in the chamber. Elias's instincts kicked in before his brain processed the threat. He saw the faint glint of a projectile heading toward the royal throne. Princess Karen, heir to the Synax Empire, was seated there. Without thinking, Elias moved. His body reacted faster than any rational thought. He lunged forward, tackling Karen out of her seat just as the energy bolt flew past them, scorching the royal crest behind her. The room erupted into action. Synax warriors roared, drawing their weapons as guards stormed in to capture the assassin. But Elias wasn't paying attention to that. He was staring into the golden eyes of the woman beneath him. Princess Karen wasn't just any alien. She was taller than him, her skin a deep bronze with glowing tribal markings across her arms. Her sharp, feline-like features were framed by black, braided hair adorned with warrior beads. She was beautiful in a way that demanded respect, like a storm ready to destroy anything in its path. And he was still holding her down. A sudden silence filled the room. Elias realized too late what he had done. Every Synax warrior in the chamber was staring at him, their expressions ranging from shock to awe. Even Karen herself wasn't pushing him away. Instead, her golden eyes burned into him with an intensity he couldn't understand. Then, in a voice that was both sharp and smooth, she spoke. "You dare claim me, human?" Elias blinked. "Wait, what?" The room trembled with the sudden pounding of ceremonial staffs against the floor. The warriors chanted in their native tongue, a rhythmic, guttural sound that made his heart pound. The Synax High Chancellor stepped forward, his 4 golden eyes narrowing at Elias. "You have enacted the right of blood claim, Terran. By saving the princess in such a manner, you have declared yourself as her mate in the eyes of our people." Elias felt his stomach drop. "What?" Karen slowly stood up, her gaze never leaving his. There was something unreadable in her expression, curiosity, amusement, or perhaps something more dangerous. She took a step closer. "You are either the bravest human I have met, or the most foolish." Elias put his hands up. "Hold on." "I didn't." The High Chancellor cut him off. "Silence. You have already sealed your fate, human. The Synax do not go back on sacred traditions. You have claimed our princess before the entire empire." Elias clenched his jaw. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Earth's fragile negotiations with the Synax were at stake. If he refused, would they see it as an insult? Would this mistake start a war? He glanced at Karen, but she didn't seem angry. If anything, she looked entertained. That was somehow even more concerning. "Surely there's a way to undo this," he said carefully. Karen tilted her head. "There is one way. You could die." Elias stiffened. "That's not a great option." The High Chancellor nodded gravely. "Then you will prove yourself worthy. In 3 days, you shall face the right of strength, a combat trial to prove your claim. Should you survive, the princess will decide if you are a fitting mate." Elias took a deep breath. He was a soldier, not a fool. There was no escape from this. Refusing meant dishonor. Dishonor meant war. War meant millions could die. So, for now, he did the only thing he could do. He looked Karen in the eye and said, "Then I'll fight." A slow smile spread across her lips, one that sent a shiver down his spine. "Good," she murmured. "I hope you survive, human. I would hate to lose a mate so. Interes, ting." And with that, the fate of two civilizations was sealed by one man's mistake. Elias Voss had fought in wars, piloted ships through asteroid fields, and outsmarted enemy fleets. But nothing had prepared him for this. He stood in the center of the Synax training hall, surrounded by towering warriors. Their golden eyes gleamed as they observed him like a strange new creature. He was the only human here, and to them, he was weak. At the far end of the hall, Princess Karen watched him with amusement. She was dressed in a dark battle robe, her braided hair tied back, revealing the sharp lines of her alien features. The way she looked at him made him feel like prey rather than a mate. Elias sighed. "How did I get into this mess?" The High Chancellor's voice echoed through the chamber. "The rite of strength begins at sunrise. You will face 3 trials. Only warriors of honor survive." His 4 golden eyes studied Elias carefully. "Do you understand, human?" Elias rolled his shoulders. "Survive the trials. Prove myself. Avoid death." "Got it." Karen smirked. "And impress me, of course." Elias shot her a look. "Not exactly my priority." Her smirk deepened. "We shall see." The first trial was simple, or so they said. Elias stood in an open arena, facing a Synax warrior twice his size. The alien had 4 arms, each one gripping a different kind of weapon. A short blade, a whip, a long spear, and a heavy gauntlet. The goal: knock him down. The warrior lunged without warning. Elias barely dodged the spear thrust, rolling to the side as the whip cracked past his face. He was fast, but his opponent was stronger. Each attack came with incredible force, shaking the ground when it missed. Elias didn't have their brute strength, but he had something else: speed and intelligence. He feinted left, drawing the warrior's attention, then kicked up a handful of dust. The warrior flinched, giving Elias just enough time to slam his elbow into the alien's knee joint. The Synax stumbled, and Elias struck again, this time at the throat. With a grunt, the warrior crashed to the ground. Silence filled the arena. Then a low murmur spread through the crowd. Elias exhaled. 1 down. Karen clapped slowly, her golden eyes filled with new interest. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as I thought." Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "Glad to impress." The second trial was a test of endurance. Elias had to run a course filled with deadly mechanical traps, spinning blades, energy pulses, and shifting platforms. Synax warriors relied on brute force, smashing through obstacles. That wouldn't work for him. He had to be smarter. Elias studied the rhythm of the traps. Everything had a pattern. The energy pulses fired every 3 seconds. The spinning blades paused just before moving again. The shifting platforms followed a predictable cycle. Using his observation skills, Elias timed his movements. He ducked, dodged, and moved with precision, slipping past the obstacles that would have torn him apart. By the time he reached the finish line, he was exhausted but alive. Karen was waiting for him, arms crossed. "You think like a hunter." Elias caught his breath. "I think like a survivor." The final trial was the hardest. A duel against General Vexar, the strongest warrior in Karen's court. Vexar was massive, his armored form casting a long shadow over Elias. The general's voice was deep, almost a growl. "You are not Synax. You should not stand here." Elias cracked his neck. "Tell that to fate." The battle began. Vexar attacked with the force of a battering ram. Elias barely blocked in time. The impact sent him skidding across the ground. One hit like that could break bones. Elias dodged, rolling away from the second strike. He couldn't win with power. He had to use his brain. Vexar swung wide. Elias ducked under the blow and countered. driving his fist into a weak spot near the alien's ribs. The general grunted but didn't fall. Elias adjusted. He feinted again, leading the warrior into overcommitting. When Vexar's balance shifted, Elias swept his leg out from under him. The general crashed to the ground. The crowd erupted in shock. A human had won. Elias stood, breathing hard. His body ached, but he was still standing. He had survived all 3 trials. The High Chancellor stepped forward, nodding. "You have proven yourself, Karen." Karen approached, looking at Elias with something new in her gaze. Respect. Interest. Something more. She tilted her head. "You are worthy. But tell me, human, why did you fight so hard? You could have surrendered." Elias met her golden eyes. "Because I don't like losing." Karen smiled slowly. "Good. Then you will fight well as my mate." Elias sighed. This was far from over. But somewhere deep inside, a part of him knew. Turning back was no longer an option. Elias Voss didn't wake up in a soft bed after his victory. Instead, he was on the cold floor of the Synax training chamber, his muscles aching from the brutal trials. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to sit up. He had survived the rite of strength, but something told him his challenges weren't over. A deep voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You fought well, human, but the real battle begins now." Elias turned to see General Vexar standing in the doorway, arms crossed. The warrior's golden eyes were unreadable, but there was no anger in them. Elias sighed, stretching his sore limbs. "You mean getting used to being part of an alien empire?" "Yeah, I figured." Vexar smirked. "No, I mean the arena of blood and honor. Tomorrow, you fight again." Elias froze. "I thought I already proved myself." Vexar stepped closer. "You proved you can survive. But the Synax people still doubt you. Many believe you are weak, unworthy of Princess Chiron." Elias rubbed his temples. "Of course they do. The arena will change that," Vexar continued. "If you win, the Synax will accept you. If you lose, you will be forgotten." Elias didn't like the sound of that. He had barely survived his last fight. How much worse could this get? The next day, the arena of blood and honor. The roar of the crowd was deafening. The arena of blood and honor was massive, its walls lined with thousands of Synax warriors. They pounded their fists against their chests, chanting for battle. This was not just a fight, it was a spectacle. Elias stood in the center of the arena, gripping the hilt of a curved Synax blade. It felt unfamiliar in his hand, heavier than a human sword. Across from him, his opponent stepped forward. Elias's stomach tightened. His opponent wasn't just any warrior. It was Gorvek, the Synax champion, a towering alien with dark blue skin. Gorvek was nearly 8 feet tall, his body packed with muscle. His 4 golden eyes locked onto Elias, filled with nothing but disgust. "A weak species like yours does not deserve a place among us," Gorvek growled. His voice was low and filled with hate. "I will end this insult." Elias tightened his grip on the sword. No pressure. Just fight an elite warrior in front of an entire empire. No big deal. The gong sounded. The fight began. Gorvek moved fast, far faster than Elias expected. The champion swung his massive axe, and Elias barely dodged in time. The force of the blow cracked the ground where he had been standing. Too strong, too fast. Elias had to change his approach. He wouldn't win in a contest of strength. But maybe, just maybe, he could outthink his opponent. Gorvek attacked again, swinging his axe downward. Instead of dodging, Elias ran toward him at the last second. The sudden move caught Gorvek off guard. Elias slid under the swing, slicing his opponent's leg with his sword. The crowd gasped as blood hit the sand. The champion roared in rage. "You dare!" Elias didn't wait for him to recover. He spun around and struck again, this time aiming for the warrior's ribs. But Gorvek was ready. He caught Elias's arm mid-swing and threw him across the arena. Pain exploded through Elias's body as he crashed into the ground. His vision blurred. The air left his lungs. He heard the crowd cheering for his defeat. "Get up, Elias." His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to his knees. Gorvek was already moving toward him, axe raised for the final strike. Elias had one chance. He waited. The moment Gorvek swung down, Elias twisted to the side, just enough for the blade to miss. Then, using every last bit of strength he had left, he drove his sword straight into Gorvek's exposed side. The champion froze. His 4 golden eyes widened in shock. Then, slowly, he fell to his knees. Silence filled the arena. Elias staggered to his feet, breathing hard. His entire body ached, but he was still standing. He had won. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, a single voice rang out. "The human is victorious." The entire arena erupted into cheers. Not all of them were happy about it, but respect had been earned. Elias exhaled. He had done it. After the fight, a new beginning. Later that night, Elias stood on the balcony of the royal palace, staring at the city lights of Sinax Prime. His body was still sore, but his mind was racing. Karen joined him, her golden eyes watching him closely. "You surprised them today." Elias chuckled weakly. "I surprised myself." She leaned against the railing. "You are no longer just a human in our eyes. You are a warrior." Elias turned to look at her. "And what does that mean for us?" Karen smirked. "It means you are no longer just my claimed mate. You are part of the Sinax. And that, Elias Voss, means there is no turning back." Elias sighed. Great. No pressure. As he looked at the alien city before him, he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. Elias Voss had been many things in his life. A soldier, a survivor, a troublemaker. But never had he imagined himself as the claimed mate of an alien princess or a warrior of an empire that once saw him as weak. Yet here he was, standing in the grand war chamber of the Sinax Palace, surrounded by towering warriors. The room was vast, lined with glowing battle maps, war banners, and holographic projections of distant star systems. Elias still felt the aches from his last fight. His battle with Gorvek had left him bruised, but more importantly, it had earned him respect. Now, instead of looking at him with disdain, the Sinax warriors studied him with curiosity. At the center of the chamber, High Chancellor Vorkin stood with his arms crossed, his 4 golden eyes narrowing as he spoke. "The time for peace is ending," he declared. "The Draknir fleets have moved into our border systems. They threaten our people. They threaten our honor." A low growl rumbled through the gathered warriors. The Draknir, a reptilian species known for their brutal war tactics, had long been enemies of the Sinax. Their sudden movement into Sinax territory could mean only one thing. War was coming. Elias listened carefully. He had fought in wars before, but this was different. This wasn't Earth's war, yet somehow it was now his. Kairon stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the Chancellor. "What is our strategy?" Vorkin gestured to the holographic map. "We will not wait for them to strike. We will take the fight to them." His eyes shifted toward Elias. "And our new warrior will join us." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Wait, just like that. No training, no briefing. Just throw me into an alien war." Vexar, the general he had fought days ago, smirked. "You prove your worth in the arena. You wish to be one of us. Then fight like one of us." Elias sighed. He had been expecting this. He wasn't just some outsider anymore. Whether he liked it or not, he had a duty now. Kairon turned to him. "You don't have to do this." Elias met her gaze. "Yeah, I do." The battle begins. The Sinax fleet was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Their warships were sleek, designed for speed and power. Their weapons glowed with energy far beyond human technology. Elias stood on the bridge of the Vorax Claw. the flagship of the Sinax fleet. Through the massive viewport, he could see the dark expanse of space, and, in the distance, the Draknir warships emerging from hyperspace. Alarms blared. The moment had come. Kieran stood beside him, now wearing full battle armor, her eyes blazing with determination. "This is your last chance to back out." Elias smirked. "Not happening." The fleet moved into formation. Ships maneuvered with precision, forming attack patterns that had been drilled into Sinax warriors for generations. The first enemy blasts came fast and violent. Green energy bolts streaked across space, colliding with Sinax shields. The ship trembled under the impact. Elias clenched his fists. This wasn't a game. This was real. "Prepare the boarding teams," Vorkin commanded. Kieran turned to Elias. "You're coming with me." Before he could protest, she grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the docking bay. Boarding the enemy warship. Elias barely had time to process what was happening before he found himself inside a Sinax assault pod. The plan was insane. Launch themselves straight into an enemy ship, break through their defenses, and disable their command systems from within. Classic Sinax strategy. All offense, no retreat. The pod shook violently as it pierced through the enemy shields. Then, impact. The doors blasted open, and the battle began. Sinax warriors stormed into the Draknir ship, weapons blazing. Elias stayed close to Kieran, his pulse racing as he fired his plasma rifle. The Draknir were vicious, their scaled bodies covered in armor, their razor-sharp claws striking with deadly precision. Elias ducked, rolling to the side as a Draknir soldier lunged at him. Too slow, he lifted his rifle and fired. A direct hit. "Nice shot," Kieran said, slashing through another enemy with her energy blade. Elias grinned. "I try." They pushed forward, fighting their way through the narrow corridors of the enemy ship. The air smelled of burnt metal and plasma fire. Every step was a fight for survival. Then they reached the command center. The choice that changed everything. Inside, a massive Draknir warlord waited. His black scales shimmered under the dim red lights, his piercing yellow eyes locking onto Elias. "You do not belong here, human," the warlord growled. Elias gripped his weapon. "Yeah, get used to it." The warlord lunged. Kieran moved to block, but the enemy was faster than expected. With one powerful strike, the Draknir knocked her aside. She hit the wall hard, her weapon slipping from her grasp. Elias's heart pounded. She was down. The warlord turned toward her, raising his blade for a killing blow. No, Elias didn't think. He just moved. With everything he had, he tackled the warlord from behind. Forcing his weapon away, they crashed to the floor, struggling for control. The Draknir was stronger, but Elias was faster. Using the warlord's own momentum, Elias twisted, driving his plasma blade straight into the enemy's chest. The warlord's eyes widened in shock. Then he collapsed. Silence. Elias turned, breathing heavily. Kieran was watching him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You saved my life." Elias shrugged. "Guess that makes us even." She smiled. "Not even close." The battle was over. The Sinax had won. But as Elias looked at Kieran, really looked at her, he realized something. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This wasn't just survival. He was becoming part of this. And deep down, he knew there was no turning back. Elias Voss sat on the metal floor of the enemy warship, breathing heavily. The smell of burnt circuits and blood lingered in the air. Around him, Sinax warriors secured the command center, their weapons still hot from battle. The Draknir warlord lay motionless at his feet, his black scales now lifeless. Elias had won, but at what cost? Kieran stood beside him, her golden eyes studying him closely. "You fought well," she said. Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, let's try not to make this a habit." A sharp voice interrupted them. We have control of the ship. General Vexar entered the room, flanked by a team of warriors. His armor was scratched from battle, but his expression was one of triumph. The enemy fleet is retreating. The Synax are victorious. A roar of approval echoed through the halls. They had won. But as Elias looked at the destruction around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The return to Synax Prime. Back aboard the Vorax Claw, the fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading back to Synax Prime. Elias sat in the med bay, getting his wounds treated by a Synax healer. The pain was dull compared to the exhaustion in his bones. Karen sat nearby, watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" Elias asked, wincing as the healer wrapped a bandage around his arm. Karen hesitated. "You are not like the warriors of my people. You fight differently." Elias smirked. "Yeah, I call it human survival instincts." She shook her head. "It is more than that. You think before you strike. You do not fight for honor alone." Elias leaned back, exhaling. "On Earth, honor doesn't keep you alive. We fight to win, not to prove something." Karen was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe that is why you survived where others did not." Elias wasn't sure how to respond. He had fought in wars before, but this one felt different. Here, he wasn't just a soldier. He was changing the fate of an empire. A divided empire. The return to Synax Prime was not as glorious as Elias had expected. Yes, the battle was won, but not everyone was happy. As he stepped off the warship, Elias noticed the way some of the warriors looked at him, doubtful, wary, even angry. One of them, a broad-shouldered warrior with silver markings on his skin, stepped forward. "You do not belong here, human." Elias sighed. "Here we go again." The warrior's gaze was cold. "You fought well, but you are not Synax. You are an outsider. You were only lucky." Elias clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Vexar stepped between them. "He is one of us now," the general said firmly, "and he has earned his place." The warrior hesitated, then gave a sharp nod before walking away. Elias exhaled. "I get the feeling some of your people don't like me." Karen crossed her arms. "Not all will accept you so easily, but you have done more than many believed possible." Elias ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, I'd rather not have to prove myself every day." Karen smirked. "Then you should not have accepted my claim." Elias stared at her. "You really enjoy reminding me of that, don't you?" She grinned. "Yes." A warning in the dark. That night, Elias stood alone on one of the palace balconies, looking over the alien city. The battle had been won, but his mind wouldn't rest. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. "You have made powerful enemies, human." Elias turned. An older Synax warrior stood in the shadows. His dark armor blended with the night, and his golden eyes glowed faintly. "Who are you?" Elias asked. The warrior ignored the question. "There are those who see you as a threat. They will not stop until you are removed." Elias folded his arms. "Let me guess. This is the part where you tell me to leave." The warrior chuckled. "No, this is the part where I tell you to be ready. The war with the Drachnir is far from over, and your battle within this empire has only just begun." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" he asked again. The warrior turned away. "A friend or an enemy? That depends on the choices you make." Then he disappeared into the night. Elias exhaled. Great. More mysteries. As he turned back toward the city, he realized something. The real fight wasn't against the Drachnir anymore. It was within the Synax Empire itself. And Elias Voss had just become a key player in a war far bigger than he had ever imagined. Elias Voss had survived battles before, against men, against alien warriors, against enemies far stronger than him. But nothing had prepared him for this, a silent war in the shadows of an empire. The Synax people were divided. Some saw him as a hero, a warrior who had proven himself in combat. Others saw him as a threat, an outsider who had no place in their world. And now, there was a warning hanging over his head. The mysterious warrior's words from the night before still echoed in his mind. Be ready. The war is far from over. Elias had spent years surviving by trusting his instincts, and right now, his instincts told him he was being watched. A dangerous gathering. The palace halls were filled with tension. Tonight, a royal council was being held, one that would decide the next move in the war against the Draknir. Elias entered the council chamber beside Chiron. The room was grand, with tall pillars and a long table where the most powerful Synax leaders sat. At the head of the table stood High Chancellor Vorkin, his 4 golden eyes scanning the room. We gather to discuss our next step, he said. The Draknir will not remain weak for long. We must strike again before they recover. Murmurs of agreement echoed around the chamber. But then, a deep voice spoke. And yet we allow a human to stand among us as if he is one of our own. Elias turned to see a broad-shouldered Synax warrior rise to his feet. His silver armor gleamed under the chamber lights, and his expression was filled with disdain. I am Lord Xaltor, the warrior said, his eyes locking onto Elias. And I demand to know, why is this outsider still here? Elias felt Chiron tense beside him. She opened her mouth to speak, but Elias raised a hand. I can answer that myself, Elias said, stepping forward. The room fell silent. Every eye was on him now. I fought for this empire, Elias continued. I bled for it. I killed for it. If that's not enough to earn my place, then tell me, what is? Xaltor's jaw tightened. A true warrior does not need to ask for his place. Elias smirked. Good thing I'm not asking. The tension in the room thickened. Some warriors looked at Elias with approval, others with anger. Was making enemies, powerful ones. Chancellor Vorkin finally spoke. Enough. The human has proven himself. But if there are those who doubt him, let them challenge him the Synax way. Elias narrowed his eyes. And what way is that? Xaltor's lips curled into a smile. A hunt. The hunt begins. Elias stood on the edge of a dense alien jungle. Thalveron, the wild hunting grounds of the Synax towering trees with glowing vines, stretched high into the sky. Strange creatures lurked in the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant danger. He wasn't alone. Chiron stood beside him, gripping the hilt of her blade. This is insane, Elias muttered. I don't have time for a jungle adventure. Chiron smirked. If you refuse, they will see you as weak. Elias sighed. Of course they will. Ahead of them, Xaltor and a group of his warriors stood ready. The rules are simple, Xaltor said. We enter the jungle. The first to bring back the fang of the dreadbeast wins. Elias frowned. And if I lose? Xaltor grinned. Then you leave Synax space and never return. Elias exhaled. Great. A horn sounded, and the warriors dashed into the jungle. Elias and Chiron followed, their senses on high alert. The jungle was alive. Strange alien birds screeched overhead, and the ground trembled with the movement of unseen creatures. Elias glanced at Chiron. What exactly is a dreadbeast? She gave him a serious look. A predator. Fast, armored, and nearly impossible to kill. Elias groaned. Of course it is. The monster in the shadows. Hours passed. The jungle was a maze of twisting paths and glowing plants. Elias kept his plasma rifle ready, every sound making his pulse quicken. Then, a roar split the air. Elias turned just in time to see a massive creature burst from the trees. The dreadbeast was a nightmare. Its skin was covered in black chitinous armor. Its red eyes glowed with hunger. It had 4 muscular legs and razor-sharp claws, and it was charging straight at him. Move, Chiron shouted. Elias dove to the side as the beast swiped at him. Its claws ripped through a tree like it was paper. Elias rolled to his feet, raising his weapon. He fired, but the blast barely scratched the monster's armor. "Not good," Elias muttered. Zelter and his warriors emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. They had tracked the beast too. "Stand aside, human," Zelter growled. "This kill belongs to me." Elias ignored him. This wasn't about ego. It was about survival. The dread beast roared and charged again. Zelter's warriors attacked, but the beast was too fast. With a single swipe, it sent 2 Synax warriors flying. Elias saw his opening. He ran toward the beast's exposed side, pulling a small explosive device from his belt. Karen's eyes widened. "Elias, wait." Too late. Elias leaped onto the creature's back, grabbing onto the ridges of its armored skin. The beast bucked wildly, trying to throw him off. With all his strength, Elias plunged the explosive into a gap in the armor, then kicked off just in time. Boom! The explosion ripped through the creature's side. It roared in pain, stumbling backward. Elias hit the ground hard, rolling to a stop. He looked up just in time to see the beast collapse, breathing its last breath. Silence. Zelter stared at Elias, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Elias stood up, brushing dirt from his jacket. "I think that means I win." Karen laughed. Yes, you do." Zelter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The challenge had been made. The challenge had been answered. Elias Voss had proven himself once again. But as he looked into the jungle, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still ahead. Elias Voss stood at the heart of the Synax capital, his boots planted firmly on the grand platform where warriors were honored. Above him, banners of the empire fluttered in the wind, and below, thousands of Synax citizens watched in silence. He had won the hunt. He had proven himself. But the war was not over. High Chancellor Vorkin raised a hand. "Elias Voss, you have passed the trials. You have claimed victory in combat. You have earned your place among us." A roar of approval echoed through the city, but not everyone cheered. Elias could see Zelter and his supporters standing at the edges of the crowd, their eyes filled with resentment. He had made enemies, and they were waiting for him to make one mistake. A dire warning. That night, Elias stood on a palace balcony, staring at the twin moons in the sky. Karen joined him, her golden eyes scanning his face. "You should be celebrating," she said. Elias exhaled. "I don't trust easy victories." She tilted her head. "You suspect something." Elias nodded. "Zelter won't let this go. There's a storm coming. I can feel it." Karen was silent for a moment, then said, "If he challenges you again, I will fight by your side." Elias smirked. "You just like having an excuse to stab people." She grinned. "Perhaps." Before Elias could respond, a sharp sound echoed from the palace gates. An alarm. Then a voice rang through the comm system. "Draknir ships inbound. They have broken through our outer defenses." Elias's blood went cold. The war had come to Synax Prime. The siege begins. The skies burned as the enemy fleet descended. The Draknir had regrouped faster than anyone expected. Elias ran to the war room, where General Vexar was already coordinating the defenses. "They've launched ground forces," Vexar growled. "They mean to take the city." Elias looked at the map. Enemy troops were landing in waves, their war machines already marching toward the capital. "We need to push them back before they breach the inner walls," Elias said. Vexar nodded. "You will lead the counterattack." Elias smirked. "I thought you'd never ask." The battle for Synax Prime. The streets became a battlefield. Elias led a squad of warriors through the burning city, his rifle blazing as they pushed back the invaders. Draknir soldiers, their reptilian bodies armored in black plating, fought fiercely. But Elias fought harder. Karen fought beside him, moving like a blur, her energy blade cutting through enemies with precision. Explosions rocked the buildings. The smell of smoke and blood filled the air. Then, a monstrous figure emerged from the fire. A Draknir warlord, standing twice as tall as Elias, covered in thick crimson armor. Elias gritted his teeth. This was their leader. The warlord pointed at Elias. "Human, you are the reason for this war." Elias rolled his shoulders. "Funny. I was just about to say the same thing about you." With a deafening roar, the warlord charged. The final duel. Elias dodged the first strike, barely. The warlord's blade slammed into the ground, cracking the stone beneath them. Karen tried to intervene, but Elias held up a hand. "No, this one's mine." The warlord swung again. Elias ducked, countering with a plasma shot to the side. But the armor held. "Your weapons are weak, human," the warlord snarled. Elias smirked. "Good thing I have other tricks." He activated his wrist gauntlet, deploying a shock charge directly onto the warlord's chest. Electricity surged through the Draknir's body. He roared in pain, stumbling backward. Elias didn't waste time. He lunged, blade in hand, and drove it deep into the warlord's neck. The enemy leader fell, eyes wide in shock. The battlefield went silent. And then, the Draknir forces began to retreat. The battle was over. The war ends, for now. As the sun rose over the ruined city, Elias stood at the highest tower of the palace, looking down at the aftermath. Sinak's warriors tended to the wounded. Smoke still rose from the battlefield. Karen joined him, her expression unreadable. "You did it." Elias exhaled. "We did it." She studied him for a moment, then said, "What now?" Elias looked at the horizon. "Now, we rebuild. We prepare." Karen nodded. "The Draknir will return." Elias smirked. "Let them. Next time, they won't be so lucky." She smiled. "You sound like a Synax now." Elias chuckled. Maybe he was. He had come here as an outsider. Now he was a warrior of the Empire. And this was only the beginning. The human had claimed his place, and there was no turning back.